Some people say that the blues is a simple form of music and that it's easy to play. But you know as well as I that when it comes to playing a blues guitar solo, it's easier said than done. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you my top 7 tips to help you execute a great blues guitar solo. But just be sure to stick around till the very end of the video because I've got a free gift for you and your guitar that I think you're both going to love. Okay, so let's get into it. Tip number 1 actually lays down the foundation on our fretboard that we can use for executing our blues solos, and it's what we like to call the 2 core pentatonic soloing zones and how to double them. So we're essentially going to look at 2 pentatonic positions on the fretboard that are a good distance apart, so you actually are able to traverse the fretboard just between the 2 of them, and they each kind of have their own sort of way of navigating the scale that can inspire different kinds of licks. But not only that, we're going to talk about how to double them in a completely new octave, so you essentially have 4 scales to work with for the price of 2. And for this lesson, we're going to focus everything around the key of A, right? So starting with that first pentatonic position we're going to take a look at, it's actually, when we're in the key of A, it's in this open position region right here. And it's this pentatonic position that starts with the root note on the open A string. Since we're in the key of A, that open A naturally would be a root note. So it looks like this. So what we have here is open A, 3rd fret, open D, 2nd fret, open G, 2nd fret, 1st fret on the B string, then 3rd fret, open high E, and then 3rd fret. Now, one great thing about this pentatonic scale being right here in the open position is that it's right there in the same neighborhood as open chords, or if you're doing like the open, cowboy blues, like the driving thing. And you want to use it to throw in some riffs and fills. So it's just right there. You don't have to go all the way up here and then back down. So if you're trying to combine rhythm and lead and stuff, just the fact that we're in the key of A, by virtue of its positioning here, we can totally use it with that kind of context. Next up, the second pentatonic soloing zone you may actually be familiar with already, but it's right here. 5-8 on low E, 5-7 on A, 5-7 on D, 5-7 on G, 5-8 on B, 5-8 on high E. And this position right here is generally the first one that most guitarists learn when they're learning how to play the minor pentatonic, and it's just the home to so many famous blues licks that we grew up listening to and loving. And just between these 2 pentatonic soloing zones, we have this open position one, and then we have this position right here in the middle of the fretboard, which gives us some more notes to work with since we're going across all 6 strings. But just with that, there's so much that we can get out of that as far as mileage, going between the 2, like. There's just a lot we can do there. But we're going to take it even further and double our output by taking each of these pentatonic soloing zones and move them up an octave. So starting with the open position one right here, we're going to go up 12 frets. So remember when we started on the open A string? We're going to now start on the 12th fret on the A string. And it's going to look like this. Same exact scale as this. Right? Just an octave higher. So we're at 12-15 on A, 12-14 on D, 12-14 on G, 13-15 on B, and 12-15 on high E. So we now have this position here. So we can take full advantage of the kind of tonality, the way that we can navigate the scale just by way of those notes being laid out, but at an upper octave. And then we can use this lower octave when we're playing like the rhythm stuff too. So it gives us a whole lot to work with. So we have that, right? So if we were to combine, before we even go to the final one, of the octave up, just between those 3, we can do stuff like this, So even even just those 3 out of 4 positions that we're going to be looking at, we can go way across the fretboard, cover a whole lot of ground. So let's get into the upper octave of our second pentatonic soloing zone, right? Would start here on the 5th fret, right? So we're going to bring that up 12 frets. So we go all the way up here to the 17th fret, right, on the low E string, and we're going to go, now this is going to get right up there, right, in the upper register. So depending on the kind of guitar you have, you know, if you got, let's say, an acoustic guitar that doesn't have a cutaway and can't really take you that high, you could totally omit this last octave up scale, because as you saw just in that small example, there's a whole lot to work with just those 3 positions. And of course, we got 6 more tips to get into, which will have a whole lot more content, you know, as far as upgrading our guitar solos with the blues. So don't worry so much, you know, if you can't necessarily reach these frets. But if you can, you'd be going 17 to 20 on the low E, 17, 19 on A, 17, 19 on D, 17, 19 on G, 17, 20 on B, 17, 20 on high E. So you now have the tonality of this scale right here, but way up here. So even though they're the same notes, you get a different vibe just because of the octave that they're in. So it doesn't become as repetitive if you were to just do, let's say, the same lick, but way up here. It gives almost a nice call and response kind of vibe, which we'll actually get into, because that's kind of, I'm spoiling one of the tips here. So that's tip number 1, is you have those pentatonic soloing zones, right? The 2 of them, right? The one here in the open position if we're in the key of A, and then right here in this middle position, and then we bring them both up an octave so that we have these 4 positions that literally traverse the entirety of our fretboards, so we can reach all the heights and depths that we want to, as far as just the timbre of the scale. You know, even though these are all the same notes, just being repeated over and over again and in different octaves, they give us a completely different sound. So we want to be able to play the notes in the low register and the middle register and the upper register, because that'll just give us more of a playground to mess around with, and it'll give us inspiration for more musical ideas. Moving on to tip number 2, which is the 4-note Freddie King soloing zone. Now, we're going to take what we had just covered and then isolate a very specific little part that Freddie King tended to prefer when he was playing, and man, was he able to pull out some great sounds just from that 4-note little box that we're going to look at. So let's take a look at that here. So what we're going to do is take this position in A minor pentatonic that we already know, right? And what we're going to do is we're actually going to stop right here at the 7th fret of the G string, and we're going to slide up to the 9th fret. And this is going to lead us into that 4-note Freddie King soloing zone. So if you walk up that scale and you slide up from the 7th fret to the 9th fret, this is our little bridge note into this new 4-note group we're about to get into, which is going to be 8, 10 on the B string. Remember, we're in the key of A, and 8, 10 on the high E string. Here are the 4 notes: 1, 2, 3, 4. And our little 9th fret, you know, sliding into that 9th fret on the G string is a great way to walk right into that zone. So these 4 notes sound incredible by themselves. And in fact, you know, you have this huge framework of pentatonic positions to mess with from tip number 1, but with tip number 2 giving you this 4-note soloing zone, it's a great way to examine how great guitar players like Freddie King could really just milk those 4 notes and just make a great sounding solo. And it's a great place to just isolate and just challenge yourself to focus on making great sounds yourself and making those notes feel interesting throughout an entire, like, 12 bars, let's say, of a solo. And that way it'll really inspire you to use that same approach when you're applying it to the fretboard at large. Because you don't want to just have all these notes but not really know what to do with them. It's a great place to start with a small little box like this. So let's take a look. I'm going to throw on a slow blues backing track, and I'm going to mess around in this 4-note soloing zone and show you what I'm talking about. So you see, if you just like live in those 4 notes for a while and just do little things like slides, bends, vibratos, you know, things to really make it vocal and interesting and not so static, and really, you know, to avoid just going up and down, you know, those 4 notes, it's like you can really force yourself to even like repeat phrases. That's the great thing about the blues, is you can repeat phrases as many times as you want, you know, and even just do little variations in how you play it. That's kind of what I was trying to do in that previous example there. I was like, I had kind of a motif in mind, and I was doing little slight changes, little subtle things to make them, you know, not feel very repetitive, and just really make those 4 notes really work, and without having to, you know, be tempted to venture out and start playing other notes. But of course, there's always room for other notes, which brings me to tip number 3, which is the 3-note B.B. King soloing zone. Now in this tip, we're going to venture into a different tonality. We're actually going to get into a little bit of major pentatonic, and we're going to go into a little box that B.B. King tended to play a lot in. So in the key of A, if we were to find these 3 notes, it's actually right here, starting on the 11th fret of the G string, and then the 10th fret of the B string, and then the 12th fret. And of course, especially right here on the 12th fret, you want to do some bends, some whole step bends. So you get into this more jovial, happy sound using the major pentatonic tonality, and it works beautifully in tandem with minor pentatonic. It's just something that really is exclusive to the blues, you know? It just it sounds really bluesy when you're mixing major and minor pentatonic. So this gives us a little box to get those happy, kind of gospel-like, you know, major pentatonic sounds out of it. But if I were to give you kind of a ratio to work with, you know, when it comes to usually, you know, what happens with the blues, at least, you know, from what I've seen and from what I've heard from players that are much more proficient and, you know, authentic blues players than I am, is that you would really do a majority minor pentatonic and a minority major pentatonic. So especially if you're playing a slow blues, like in the example that I've been playing over, is doing kind of an 80-20 split. So 80% minor pentatonic, 20% major. So if you start doing too much major pentatonic, it starts to sound a little bit more gospel-like, or even kind of gets into country territory where it's like mostly major pentatonic, happy sounding kind of stuff, which is great. That's all fine and good. But since we're talking about the blues, it's really that minor pentatonic where the blues tends to live, because you get that kind of sadness, that really expressive, like sadness that can be subtle, but it can be aggressive too. But if you were to throw in just a little bit, just pepper in some major pentatonic, you can get some beautiful sounds that really can move you, you know, and can move your listeners. So this 3-note box here, right, which actually is right here next to that 4-note Freddie King box. And then we have, and of course, we you know, having our other pentatonic positions, if we were to go back to like tip 1, these 2 boxes here, actually, like the Freddie King box and the B.B. King box, actually pretty, you know, well connect this pentatonic position here and this one. They're like right in between. So it's a nice way to bridge the two, to have a nice kind of a pathway so that you can move from one position to the next while going through all of these little boxes here. So let me go ahead and throw on that backing track. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play around with that 3-note box just to really show you the tonality I'm talking about. And then I'll start to get into what it would look like in that sort of 80-20 split in a real soloing context. Okay, here's just the BB box. So now I'm going to start throwing in minor pentatonic and then just bringing in a little bit of that major. So I'll just stick with the Freddie King box and the BB King box. So. So you can hear how those two tonalities work really well together, but you do want to keep that ratio more minor pentatonic heavy, just to keep within that feeling of the blues, but you can pepper in a little bit of that happy, like spiritual, gospel sound that I love. Believe me, I really love that stuff. And throwing that in there, especially like to end a phrase, so if I were to do something like something real simple, just using a part of that box just to end that phrase really worked, Or if I were to do something like playing, let's say I start in the major pentatonic, and then I wanted to throw in minor pentatonic, so I can go. So they work nicely together, and you can hear that sort of tension going back and forth. But what you want to avoid is either doing like an even split between the two, or just kind of like, you could experiment obviously and feel it out. You want to find out what works and what doesn't. But I'm telling you, I spent a lot of time, practicing on this, executing this in the field, getting the opinions of guitar players I respect, and kind of the general consensus is if you're really trying to play the blues, you want to have a majority minor pentatonic and a minority with a major pentatonic. So it doesn't have to be 80-20 exactly. I'm just giving you a ballpark to work with. You can just kind of mess around based on your own personal preferences and based on your favorite blues guitar players, and just kind of, mirror the same kind of ratio that they use. Oh, and by the way, if you're getting value out of this lesson, please do me a favor and hit that like button, and consider subscribing to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. It really helps us out, and it lets us know that you want to see lessons just like this one, which we'd be more than happy to give you. So thanks in advance, and let's get right back to it. Now moving on to tip number 4, which follows perfectly with the first 3 tips that we've gone over, we're going to talk about phrasing. And not just phrasing, but a certain way to go about phrasing. So if, let's say, you've heard that term before and you're like, how do I phrase? What does that even mean? How do I do that? We're going to talk about a great way that has been, the trail has been blazed by blues guitar players, before us, with this sort of approach to phrasing that is just a lot of fun, and it makes a lot of sense. So we're going to go with the call and response way to create phrases that you don't just hear that with blues guitar, but just like in blues music in general, whether it's between a singer and the guitar player, or the guitar player and the piano player, there's all kinds of different ways that the call and response just works. It's just a big part of the overall blues sound. So we're just gonna essentially take that idea and just bring it just to, ourselves at our fretboards, so that we can do this call and response thing and just kind of lead the charge on it ourselves, and it'll really help us out with getting into that phrasing habit. So for example, let's say we're to take this lick right here. Right, so right here in this pentatonic position between the 5th and 7th frets, I'm just doing a whole step bend on the 7th fret of the G string, bringing it down and pulling out to 5th fret, and then resolving it on the 7th fret of the D string, right? So that lick right there, super simple, something you hear in the blues all the time. Now that, let's say, is our call lick, right? So we have our call, now what would be our response? We can take that same lick, play it in a new octave, and we can consider that our response. So we could take this an octave up, way up here, or even better, we can use the Freddie King, the 4-note Freddie King soloing zone, which actually happens to be the same notes as right up here. But the timbre of it being on the B and the high E strings is part of what gives it that sound, and what seemed to just be like part of what Freddie King preferred about those notes is where they were located on the fretboard, and they happen to be conveniently closer to like this pentatonic position here. So if we were to do our call lick like this, then we can do our response lick like this. So you can think of it in terms of octaves, right? Have one lick, your call lick be an octave, and then your response lick be another octave. It's just a great way to start off with it, because it'll kind of sound like 2 different instruments, or even 2 different guitar players. So if you were to do something like that, have a little call lick and make it nice and brief, something like that. Then you have your response lick, And you want them to kind of match the vibe of each other. They're just in different octaves. So that's a perfect starting point to get you going with the concept of phrasing. Is just think in terms of call and response. That'll just be your jumping off point. Once you get comfortable with that, it'll start to shape how you form phrases in your head. And when you come up with them in your head, when you get so used to the sound of these notes, you'll be able to come up with a phrase in your head and you'll know where to play it in the position of the scale because you've spent a lot of time, working on that. And you can actually think to yourself, a simple lick like that. And then you'd know where it would be for the call part and then for the response part. And you can even do slight changes. So it doesn't have to be the exact lick, but like I said, you want to match the overall vibe. So you can do something like, and then your response lick can be something like that. I kind of went a little too busy with those examples, but you can see how there was just slight changes there. So even if it's a really simple, stripped down kind of phrase, you can do slight changes just to make it feel interesting, even though you are playing in 2 different octaves. So that'll be a great little gateway for you when you're getting into the concept of phrasing. Tip number 5 is going to be helpful for your phrasing as well, and that's using the saxophone approach. So what does that even mean? Basically, the saxophone approach is like this. When you think about a sax player, the phrase really only lasts as long as how much breath they have, right? Because it's their lungs that are powering the instrument, right, to create the phrase. So you can run out of steam pretty quick when you run out of breath, but as guitar players, we're not really worried about that. So we can just kind of keep going and going and going, Energizer Bunny style, but that can lead to overplaying, that can lead to just like boring playing, where we lose dynamics. We don't want to fall into that trap of where our fingers just keep going. They're just like on autopilot. We don't have any control. So in order to help rein that in and give you more control is to do what a saxophone player would do. And if we're a guitar player, essentially what we would do is we would inhale, take a breath, and then as we exhale, play a phrase. So let's take something simple. Let's just say right here in the same little pentatonic position between the 5th and 7th frets on the G and the D strings. So if I were to inhale and then exhale, and as I'm breathing out, I'm going to be playing, and I'm going to stop after I run out of breath, right? That was it. That was all it took, right? Let me take another breath. So notice how you're starting to hear my phrasing is having there's like a set sort of duration to it. Once I really lock it in with my breathing patterns, And when I put them all together, then I'm actually creating this coherent, series of musical sentences because there's actually some space between them. Creating space is especially important in the blues. So doing the saxophone approach will be very helpful, like I said, to rein you in and prevent you from overplaying. So you can actually start to develop a sense of phrasing and a sense of timing with your phrasing that actually kind of times well with your lung capacity, essentially. Moving on to tip number 6. Now this is a fun one. This is going to be building up your solos using 7th chords. I think the best way to explain this tip is just to show it to you, and then I'll just break down exactly what I was doing. Well, that one's a doozy. All right, let's break it down. So what I was essentially doing was playing an A7th chord, but I was using this D7 chord shape, which you may be familiar with if you ever played an open D7 chord. It's that same shape. So it's like that reverse triangle. You have like the regular D chord, the regular triangle, and that reverse triangle for that D7 shape. But we bring it up here. So if we're in the key of A, you'd want it to be 9th fret on the G string, 8th fret on the B string, 9th fret on the high E string. And of course that will work over an A, over the 1 chord. And in the context of soloing, I was essentially strumming this thing for dear life. So, and I'll show you what I was doing, the technique I was doing to minimize the amount of inconsistencies with your strumming, because it's something that's really, really fast, But before we get into that, what I was doing was, this A7 chord, but whenever the 4 chord came in, right, which would be D, I was doing the same exact little triad, but just brought down a fret. So it's right here on the 8th fret on the G string, 7th fret on B, 8 on high E. So on the 1 chord, then to the 4 chord, and then back to the 1 chord. You know, as far as the progression went. So what I was doing, you know, strum wise, was I actually like to take the kind of shoulder of my pick, so that's more of a rounded edge, and I'll actually do the picking right on the neck. So kind of like where the neck meets the body of my guitar. That's where I like to do it, because if I'm doing it over here, there's more of a likelihood that the pick's gonna get caught on the strings, especially if I'm doing that really kind of like really fast, feverish kind of strumming. Just a little bit more secure when you're doing that strumming right here over the neck. So that's what I would recommend when you're actually executing this. And it really works best when you're building up. So if you start a solo, let's say, you know, nice and broken down and dynamic and smooth, and then it builds up to this kind of like climactic point, busting out those 7th chords is gonna be the perfect way to go about that. And finally, we've arrived at tip number 7, which is to play your blues guitar solos with only your fingers. So essentially, putting the pick down and just focusing on building phrases and exercising restraint, basically utilizing all those tips that we have just covered, but now just use your fingers when you're playing them. It's gonna also really help you, you know, to prevent you from overplaying, because it's a lot harder to noodle when you're just using your fingers. So I'm gonna throw on that backing track again, and I want you to listen to the difference in tone just from using my fingers. And I'm gonna be really using my thumb, my first finger, and my middle finger the most as far as what appendages I'm using for the solo. There really is something special that happens when you're playing a blues guitar solo with just your fingers. For one, you know, there's a pretty set amount of restraint that you force on yourself, which is a good thing. You know, it keeps you staying tasteful, but it really lets you focus on dynamics, you know, between playing real soft and hard, you know. If I wanted to play a softer phrase, I'll use my thumb, you know. Then I'll use my first or my second finger to like do something a little bit harder. And I'll just like kind of get under there and just like kind of like really kind of pull the string, almost like, you know, if I were chicken picking or something. I really let, you know, my first finger do that, and my second finger as well. And then the thumb is just really about playing real soft. So you have that really nice dichotomy of dynamics just between those fingers. So it puts you in a nice state. It forces you to really play the blues. You know, you have that restraint, you can focus more on phrasing, you know, combining with the saxophone approach where you're just like inhaling and then only playing a phrase as long as, you know, you have air in your lungs. All those things are really gonna add up, and they're gonna add a lot more authenticity and a lot more just an elevated sound overall to your blues soloing. Now I know we've already gone through our 7 tips, but I have a bonus 8th tip for you, and it is this. Learn how to play blues licks and solos note for note. There's really no better way to understand blues guitar than to study the blues guitarists that came before us. And that's gonna involve a lot of active listening to their music, but also learning how to play what they played. So you can really get it under your fingers and understand on a much more fundamental level what it was that they were doing and how they got their sound. And there are a lot of legendary blues guitar solos that are actually really simple and attainable to play. So even if you're more of an intermediate player, you shouldn't have as much of a problem learning a lot of these solos. And again, when you have like little boxes like what we've been working with, you know, a lot of these blues solos are really contained within what we've already covered. So you already have a foundation to learn these from. And of course, I don't need to remind you that there's a tremendous amount of resources available to you online to actually learn these solos. So those are my curated tips that are going to help level up your blues guitar playing. And we've covered a lot of ground in just one key, the key of A. But imagine if you had the skill to apply what we've learned today to every key. Well, that just so happens to be what I got in store for you now that you've made it to the end of this video. It's that free gift I was talking about. Remember that? Well, here it is. This right here is your follow-up lesson that's going to show you how to instantly solo in any key. So we've covered the key of A today, which is 1, but there are 12 notes in Western music, so we have 11 other keys to worry about. And this lesson is going to show you in a very short time how to get those other 11 keys. Did I mention that it's free? Yes, it's absolutely free and it's absolutely yours today. All you got to do is click here to claim your copy or check the link in the description box. I think one of the things that'll really help keep blues guitar alive is to really focus on the authenticity of it. And the best way to do that is to study the people who really lived the blues, that laid the foundation for us to learn from, without actually having to go through all of that hardship ourselves.